You guys hear me? Okay, there we go. Good evening, everyone. And glad everyone's here tonight. I'm glad I'm here tonight. I've been a little bit sick, getting over a flu. I don't know if you've heard, but a flu for a man is a pretty big deal. So I'm here, doing all right. Sorry if my voice is a little flat. Do the best I can. So this quarter, starting this week, and I think going all the way through the end of February, it'll be about 10 weeks. We'll be looking at the book of Ecclesiastes, and this is kind of one that I'm particularly excited about. I've always had a fascination with this book, and I've always enjoyed reading through it, seeing little verses here and there in that sense, and then also spending time and reading whole chapters or reading the whole book at in a 1 or 2 day period. And I've gotten to do that a couple times recently, and it's been very beneficial for me. So looking forward to going through this class with you, and it's interesting for a lot of reasons. You could call it a book, but really you could kind of call it a journal, or I guess like a personal diary of a man who I guess you could say really did it all, and someone who lived every life experience, I guess maybe had every kind of possession someone could dream of at that time, had all kinds of power, wealth, fame, experienced every kind of pleasure, wrote it all down, and what he wrote down was his thoughts and feelings on all those parts of his lives, how they really materialized, and what his final judgments are on all that. And it's interesting for us today to read through this and think every single one of these principles still applies today. And so I'm just going to use the key here. Some of the observations I've made in Ecclesiastes, obviously be sharing, but 3 just general observations or patterns that kind of are consistent throughout the book. Probably will switch those first 2, but he will record, like I said, his feelings and observations as he searches for meaning in life, but particularly meaning apart from God, meaning in life as a part of a relationship from God. And that's important to keep in mind. He's intentionally doing that, the writer in this book. And so after that, he then notes kind of as the book goes on, he kind of notes his loss of enthusiasm for life. And you kind of read through Ecclesiastes, it gets a little pessimistic, a little down. And it's interesting how the writer shares that perspective. And then finally, like I said, he makes those final conclusions, shares those lessons towards the end of each chapter. So, like I said, the whole point of this book is trying to find a meaning in life. And if you had to look at a modern Ecclesiastes, you could go in a million different directions today. There's a bunch of how-to books or meaning of life books written by celebrities or famous philosophers, whatever. But just 3 general philosophies that maybe some of us might know. The first being materialism, which is a little bit self-explanatory, but basically the concept being acquire and consume as much resources or things of this material world as you can. And that's really the meaning of life. Then there's existentialism. It's kind of one that came to mind. And I was kind of looking through that and reading through it a little bit, and it's really basically boils down to life is really just what you make it. And in fact, it's really up to that individual to make their own terms of what the meaning of life is. That's really the true meaning, is it's within each individual, and it's up to you. It's really how you make it. And then kind of my sarcastic favorite is postmodernism. And a lot of the political podcasts or debates you see are debating these ideas that are attacking Western culture today. And basically, postmodernism is there really is no truth. There really is no subjective reality. You're really boiled down to the sum of your parts, your history, your culture, your race. That's really what your meaning of life is for you. It kind of boils down into this matrix that's seen as you're either an oppressor or part of the oppressed. And life is really about power. There's really no meritocracy. There is no truth. Meritocracy is really just a way of you wielding power. Go on and on about these things, but you can really blend all three of these, and you kind of have like American culture today. And that is a prime example why American culture today needs Ecclesiastes. These three principles really are looking for looking for the meaning of life totally without God. This is where it'll lead you. So just some background on Ecclesiastes. The word Ecclesiastes is translated from the Greek Septuagint as preacher, and really that word means congregator or one who calls the assembly. As we read in the first few verses, it's not explicitly said anywhere in the text, but it's pretty obvious if reading through Proverbs or Song of Solomon, or you read some of the descriptions of Solomon in 1 Kings. This is obviously written by Solomon. The descriptions he uses of himself throughout the book really only fit him, and we'll get into that later. But this book was written, they guess, somewhere around 925 BC. And they guess kind of towards the end of Solomon's life. Solomon had a pretty interesting life. To give a quick summary, he's obviously the son of David, and as David was getting ready to pass, and it became apparent that Solomon was going to lead Israel, he was in his younger teen years and realized he didn't have the capability or the wisdom to be able to do it. Asked God for that wisdom, and God granted him that and more. And that's really one of Solomon's main famous characteristics in the Bible, is his expansive knowledge and wisdom, and not just, I guess, ordinary knowledge and wisdom, but the ability to study and have a great capacity for memory and discern and judge certain situations. Something he's obviously very well known for. Sadly, he drifted off and kind of, for various reasons, got into idolatry and hardened his heart and turned away from God. God consequently punished him, and then towards the end of his life, it sort of implied that he reopened his heart and his obedience to God again. And that's kind of where Ecclesiastes lines up with this. And really the theme of the book is the word vanity. It comes right out and says it in chapter 1 and verse 2. But vanity in the sense that, when we think about that word today, we might think somebody who puts too much pride or effort into their appearance, or I guess pride or effort into really anything, material or shallow. And that's true, I would say. I guess that's a true statement. But the context of how vanity is used in Ecclesiastes is, and the true meaning of the word here is really described as a breath or a vapor. And he's using the word vanity as a metaphor of life without God is just that. It's just a breath. It's a vapor. In the sense of its span, and it's worthwhile. It's chasing after a vapor. So that's a little bit of background, a little bit of context there. But let's go ahead and get right into chapter 1 and verse 1. So it opens up and says, "The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What advantage does a man have in all his works which he does under the sun?" So, like I said, kind of comes out in the very beginning and boom, states the theme, the premise, and declares his thesis, I guess, of where he's going to be going. And let's see here. Let's just move on to verse 4 here. Trying something new with some notes here, and it's throwing me off a little bit. Okay. So in verse 4 it says, a generation goes, and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. So, backing up a little bit. So, in stating that thesis, makes his point, comes out and says that, okay, life is vanity. It's full of vanity. Then I'm going to go ahead and explain why. And starting in verse 4, he's going to give four reasons, I guess, that I kind of boiled it down the way I read it and divided it out. Kind of gives 4 reasons to back up that claim he's making. First being pretty simple and something that is a sobering reminder to us in our lives. And a generation comes and it goes, and a generation comes, and the earth remains forever. Do you ever spend time and just think about your family history and go back and see your grandma's grandma, where they're from, their story, just even distant relatives? And it's interesting, you spend some time and you think about it and you think, oh, wow, that's cool. Wow, that's hard times. I can't believe they overcame it. And then you kind of close the book and, oh, we got to get going. And you don't hardly think about it anymore. And those people are real. They lived and probably lived more meaningful lives than, myself or, we could say some of us today. But the point here is that one generation comes, one generation goes, and you're sort of forgotten about. And you go on to verse 5. Let's continue. It says, also the sun rises and the sun sets, and hastening to its place, it rises there again. Blowing towards the south, then turning towards the north, the wind continues swirling along, and on its circular course the wind returns. All the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. And kind of the second point he makes here is just, the first being, the continuation of generations. The second is continuation of nature. It maybe slightly changes over time, but it continues. And maybe you could read this as he's using it as a metaphor of, he's talking about nature, but even just mankind and humans. Everyday activities continue, and activity itself really produces nothing. It just is, with no explanation, with no greater meaning behind it. It's just a series of events that continue to repeat themselves. And kind of using that point of just look around at the nature and the series of events that it has there. Does anybody have kind of any other observations of that? Oh, Janine.
Yeah, in light of these verses here, this is something that can be taught to our children today because they're getting this global warming stuff in school. This is God's plan, God's creation, and this is how the earth is.
Yeah.
This is something for them to see and to know that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, Janine brings up the point of kind of over the last 10 years, or for me, I know it's been around longer, that the topic of global warming, climate change, but really sort of how that's been politicized and the obsession with it in our culture today, for some for good, some for bad reasons. Yeah, it's interesting. That discussion could go a million different directions, but kind of the takeaway I get from that, Janine, is I always find it fascinating that I know there's a lot of technological advances today, and humans have created amazing technology, but I always love how smart this generation is, and how much smarter they are than all the others, and how we've got it all figured out, and we know. When really the experts, you really press them, there's data gaps, and you don't really know. And I'm not at all trying to have a debate or anything like that, but it's more so that we are the generation that knows we can diagnose the problem. And Janine's point, this is God's creation. This is so much greater than satellites, and you know. So, one other thing, one observation I kind of had, and I don't know if I was overanalyzing, but this was written in 925 BC. And at verse 7, all the rivers flow into the sea, yet the seas are not full. Okay, so the rivers, like, it's kind of amazing. I'm gotten to be quite a water nerd in my job in agriculture over the last few years. I'm fascinated with old maps of the Kern River and how the Kern River used to come down the Sierras, go into Kern Lake, right there south of Bakersfield, come across Highway 99, Old BV Lake, work its way up through the Kern River, would continue up to Tulare Lake, join up with all the other rivers down the Sierra, and eventually go out to the San Francisco Bay. So water out there at, Kernville, going out to San Francisco Bay. And that has always been a fascinating thing to me. But when I read this, how does Solomon know that? How does Solomon know the rain cycle? How does Solomon understand how he doesn't have satellites, he doesn't have GIS mapping systems? Kind of, to me, further backs up the divine nature and backing of this writing. No man at that time, no woman, no person had knowledge of how the rivers and rains and everything connected on a grand scale on earth, in my opinion. I don't know. When I read that, I think, how would he know to write that? Obviously, God directed him, and obviously, if it was true at that time, it shows some weight to the scripture here. So, kind of an interesting thought. Moving on to verse 8. All things are wearisome. Man is not able to tell it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear filled with hearing. So, I'll just ask you guys, why is this considered, why is the curiosity of man, or the want to hear more, learn more, see more, why is that wearisome? Why does he classify it as that? What are your thoughts? Autumn.
Kind of insatiable. The more you learn, the more you keep wanting to learn.
Right. It's can never be satisfied. Can never be, the hunger for more knowledge can never be quenched, or the thirst for more knowledge can never be quenched. And that is so true. It's a theme that comes up a little bit more just in this chapter, and obviously in future chapters, but kind of drives you mad. People, scientists today, obsess over specific specialties in their field and never truly come to a satisfying, concluding answer. Always. There's just theories, there's studies, there's, for the most part. But if you just dedicate your life to just acquiring knowledge, that in and of itself, and that's the meaning of your life, you are not going to find satisfaction. So moving on to verse 9. That which has been, that is that which will always be, and that which has been done is that which will be done. So there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one might say, see this, it is new. Already it has existed for ages, which were before us. So the absence of newness. What do you guys think? Do you guys agree with that? I mean, do you think the world looks like it did in 925 BC? You don't think there's anything new? Ian.
There's absolutely a gigantic change from 925 BC. And for somebody to, on its face, just say, well, of course there's nothing new, like that would be silly.
Right.
But the whole point in what he's establishing here is that there's a pattern. It's this circular, cyclical pattern. The winds go round and round, generations come and they die, and everybody just lives and dies over and over and over and over and over, and over again, seeking the same thrills, seeking the same knowledge, seeking the same satisfaction, and never finding it. And so they die and it starts over again.
Right, you're just a pawn in that cycle. And you're a part of it. No, totally. I was obviously being sarcastic. Of course, the world looks different, but pause for a second and peel back the surface layer. No, it doesn't. And all of us would agree and give various reasons why. And, you know, you could say, if you want to go the inventions route, you know, well, chariot and cart back in those days versus a Tesla today, I'm taking the Tesla every time. Sure, of course. Convenience and the way of doing things has improved, but doing the thing is still there. Getting from point A to point B is still the thing, okay? You know, except for high-speed rail. That's going to change everything. That's totally new. Totally new. So, Carrie, go ahead.
We look back and we say, look at all the changes. Solomon did the same thing, I'm sure. He looked back. I'm sure he was well versed with the account of Abraham and all that Abraham had done, and could say to himself, look at all the changes. But then he still comes to that conclusion. So
Yeah.
he's looking back just like we're looking back, and we see all these changes in society. Well, he saw the changes as well, and he still comes to the conclusion that there's nothing new.
I'm always fascinated by, kind of to Janine's point on climate change, the current generation's inability to remember that the previous generation also looked back and saw how much things have changed and said, wow, look, I mean, I'm always just surprised at how society blinds itself to and tricks itself with its modern marvels, with its inventions, to masquerade this idea that we have created something new. We have created, in our own sense, idolatry mindset is really what it leads to. But it's a good point, Carrie. Anyway, Carrie or Mark.
It just seems like, in our life, the life that we live here on this earth, it just seems like we're never satisfied. There's always something that we're looking for. I think a lot of people think if I'm in, God's will, God's plan, then why am I so tired? Why am I so dissatisfied? Why doesn't He help me? What's going to happen with, am I going to be happy with my accomplishments that I will look back on later in life? And I think Solomon's point is he wants us to find our happiness and focus on God.
Right. Right. Certainly, those things and the things that we do here on this earth in and of themselves aren't bad. It's like what you're saying, Mark, is when you structure them around, I'm going to build my entire meaning and purpose in life around this thing, my career, whatever. That is where it just gets so interesting and it's so fascinating because it's kind of like all around us today in this world. We can talk more about it as we go on, but Carla. Good point. Yeah. She said, we are not supposed to be satisfied with this life. And really gets down to a pretty deep point of, well, where is your satisfaction lies here on this earth, you probably have a problem. If your satisfaction is with your money and your wealth, because you can get a certain layer of satisfaction with this world. You can probably we probably know a lot of people for years and years and years, they would tell you they're satisfied without a relationship with God in their life, but have stocked up earthly treasures in other areas. But there will come a point in time, whether it's towards the end of their life, at a random part in the middle of their life, that layer gets stripped away and that unsatisfaction gets exposed. But Carla makes a good point. The whole point is not to be satisfied with this earth and things of this earth. James?
Along with you cannot serve God and mammon. So is your satisfaction on earth or is your satisfaction with God?
Yeah. James makes the point, serving God versus serving man. serving man or serving the earth might bring you some satisfaction, might go for a while. It will run out. It does come to an end. But anyway, these, just kind of want to summarize these 4 points. Question, are they still true and relevant today? This was written in 925 BC. The world looked completely different. Totally different. Sorry, Robert, I think I missed you earlier.
No, that's fine. One of the things reasons I really love this first half of this first chapter is it's one of the most honest depictions of the philosophical state of man when you take out God. When you're looking purely under the sun, purely physical, it is essentially this bleak view of nihilism that nothing I do matters. My life doesn't have meaning. There's no meaning in legacy. There's no meaning in building something new. There's no point to any of it. It's all hollow, pointless, and meaningless. And there's nothing in life that is going to bring me purpose if I'm looking at a life purely under the sun. And all the modern philosophies that you brought up, to me, are ways to put dressing on a gaping wound of emptiness.
Yeah.
And Solomon really just pulls all that away and says, here's the honest, intellectual picture of what life and meaning is under the sun.
Totally. It's like I say, man, as humans, we have a amazing talent to, like you said, put a dressing on that truth. If you pressed every single person, and if every single person was truly, truly honest with those realities, it would all come to that same conclusion that you just said, that stripped down, naked version of basically nihilism. But obviously that's an uncomfortable thing to think about. People have great ways of surrounding that and cushioning it with meaning. Oh, I'm this, that, my career, my, anything. And no, it's a great point. And I just want to finish up with verse 11. It just says there, kind of puts a cap on it. There is no remembrance of earlier things, and also the later things which will occur, there will be for them no remembrance among those who will come later still. So kind of tying back to that generations point as well. The earlier things of people who put their stake in a life without God and just were a pawn in this cycle, they've been forgotten. And maybe you've been remembered for a few generations, but eventually you're forgotten. And guess what? That will happen in the future too. Larry.
Just a question, I'm not sure if you have an answer, because it came off the top of my head.
Go for it.
Written for?
Who's it written?
Main audience. Because I've noticed that when we look at it, we amen it and we tut-tut the world, and in other words, we've already bought into all this, if you want to put it that way. Was it written, it was written obviously to Israel.
Right.
So it was, I don't know, to me it looks different. We take it different if we go,
As-
no, this was written to God's people.
Yeah, as far as...
If that's the case, then are there other things that perhaps we should be looking at rather than just the obvious?
No, it's a good point. As far as who do you think this was written to? I guess the intention at that time, or just, obviously in God's great wisdom of all time, us today, is it more directed towards his people at the time and Christians today, more directed towards people in the world? I would say both, Larry, and it can really be read in two ways. It can be a comforting thing for Christians to, in times of struggle, I can tell you, this book has kind of reassured me of what matters and what is the purpose. And then I think for someone who's honest with themselves and is willing to peel back some of those layers of dressing, of, I guess, fake attempts at meaning in their life, that doesn't have a relationship with God and is willing to ponder this book, it's meant to maybe scare a little bit. So, in God's infinite wisdom, you can probably look at it multiple different ways. So, cop-out answer for you. Go ahead, Robert.
I won't get into too much detail into this, skipping ahead a little, but
Great, thank you.
I
Just
think
kidding.
there is an element to this book too that is specifically geared for younger
Totally,
to
yeah.
have a handbook of this is what you're going to be faced with. And let me tell you the honest truth of my observations so that you don't have to do and live all the hardships that I did to come to these wise conclusions.
Yeah, as a young person, don't you just sometimes rather wish somebody would tell you the hard truth ahead of time before kind of holding back some of the scary stuff, and you get right in the middle of it and you're like, you know, no. Moving on. No, I was kidding. That's your one comment tonight. All right, and so then he kind of starts in this next section of verses, and sort of, I wrote it down, so let me read it. Can't remember all these things. Sort of starts explaining, I guess, how he made these conclusions. Those four, kind of how I put my own spin on it, four conclusions. But he comes out and he just says, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I set my mind, so there's intention there, I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. And so, reason why I say there's intention there, it's not like he, obviously Solomon had the resources and the opportunity in his reign as king to do the things that he did that we will read about throughout this book. You know, to live a life like this, you need an infinite amount of supply of wealth and time, I guess, I don't know, to do these things. But he didn't just trip and fall into this lifestyle, basically. He used his wisdom that God gave him and set intention to try to experiment, I guess you can say. And that's kind of one of the cool things about this book. It's not like a theoretical book. It's not somebody writing a how-to. It's really an experiment, or I guess experiential, if that's a word, I hope it's a word, book of someone sharing their real life experiences for us. So, and then kind of the second part of 13, he says, and I think it's just kind of interesting. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. Okay, two things. What is he talking about as far as the task?
Every one of us comes to some point in their life where they do a similar task. And that's the task that he's showing us how he did it. And that we will all get to that point, hopefully, spiritual wisdom or spiritual
And-
maturity, that we will do that in our own lives as well as his task.
Mm-hmm. Why would you call it grievous, you think? It's such a grievous task about, I think, so you're kind of making the point, Mona, that coming to the realization that life, and that hard realization that life is about, yeah. That's interesting. I didn't look at it that way. I was thinking maybe that totally could be it, but the grievous task of experiencing or experimenting with all these worldly things. At first, he probably thinks, hey, if somebody gave you an agenda to do all these things, a typical person in the world today would be like, great, this is like a life adventure I get to live. But the book, as it continues, it doesn't work out that way. That's all I had. Ian.
To me, obviously reading ahead, but even in the prelude, it seems that the grievous task is the same thing that was given to Sisyphus. You have to roll this stone up the hill for all eternity. Well, what happens when I get to the top? You won't get to the top. It'll roll back down and you'll keep coming back over and over and over again. Like, there couldn't be anything more grievous to constantly fail at achieving a goal and just having to stare into the abyss of nihilism to know that this is what my life amounts to, and again, you're just marching every day towards death, that same pit.
Interesting.
It's extremely grievous, and I really appreciate Larry's comment. I don't know that this was reserved strictly for Israel,
Hmm.
especially since
Exactly. One thing I've always thought about Ecclesiastes in this book is it's a little Old Testament fast pass to Christ. It immediately for today. Like if you're going to read a book out of the Old Testament and that was immediately applicable to a situation of someone who's lost and is searching, it would immediately start striking the strings of their heart and immediately direct kind of a fast track. I guess the way to say it, and you brought it up too, this book would have been applicable to the nations around Israel. And someone could have understood that at that time too. Not, the books of the law and all the different writings that were particular to Israel at that time. This is kind of unique in that sense. Anyway, let's move on here. Verse 14. Okay, slow down. So he then sort of, so this grievous task, and he's, like I said, he's put intention into this experiment and experiencing this cycle, as Ian says, of meaningless things. And starting in verse 14, starts kind of sharing what that taught him and what are some of the lessons he learned. First, in verse 14, I had seen all the works which had been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after the wind. So sort of a repeat of what he said from the very beginning, but basically reiterating to the statement there, like all under the sun, everything in this earth apart from God is vanity. What is crooked cannot be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted. Kind of what I see him saying there is, look, nothing's going to change. Nothing has changed, nothing will change. There are so many issues in the world. Everything that I have observed in this task that I have done, and this conquest that I took, there are so many issues. I can't even tell you all the issues, let alone how to fix them. And so it's kind of I think, Janine, with global warming, I think it falls under one of those categories of it would probably do a lot of people in this society good to sort of accept that some things can't be changed and some things are baked into the cake. Sure, we can mitigate some things, but some things are so grand and some problems in this world are so unfixable and so, I guess, uncontrollable. It does someone better to make peace with that than to obsess over something like global warming. I commend people who are trying to make a difference and protect future generations under appropriate tactics, but you can go mad with those things. And you're just one individual. And it's not a hopeless, shooting down someone's dream type thing, but it's the point being of, yes, there you go. There are some things that just won't change, and there are problems that are existential to one individual. And a person that can make their peace with that and continue on with the true meaning of life will do well. So point number 3, the knowledge is useless. So in verses 16, he says, I said to myself, behold, I have magnified and increased in wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me. My mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge, and I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I realize that this is striving after the wind. Why? I guess I'll ask a kind of a maybe obvious question. Why is wisdom and knowledge vanity? I mean, why? Those are pretty good things. If your children I want to grow in wisdom and knowledge of academic things. Totally something we would encourage. But what's the difference? What's the point, Micah?
The idea, like, I can continue to pursue these things throughout my life, but perhaps at the conclusion of it, if I pass away, am I going to be able to die and have that with me?
Can't take it with you, yeah.
I can't take it with me. So is that maybe perhaps where he's trying to go with that?
Totally. That's I think certainly one of them. The idea that you in and of itself, knowledge and wisdom are good things. But like all things, too much of it taken too far to too extent, and then you start, I'm actually, this is who I am as a person. And this is my whole purpose, and this is my whole meaning, and I've kind of forgotten about God. I'm just upset. Okay. That's what he's talking about here. And that, like he says there, is striving after the wind. When I was reading this, I kind of saw sort of a comment that said that, and researching it further, that a better way to say it is probably shepherding after the wind. And I just picture this idea of someone shepherding, like a shepherd shepherding sheep, and then like a guy just shepherding the wind. If you're walking around seeing that, it's a little bit, I think of like the virtual reality stuff that they have today, where you can put on this console or this unit and sit there and play this game and, just be walking around in the air. Sometimes, you laugh at, there's some funny videos, but sometimes I think of, it's a great description, because I just picture God in heaven looking down on people of the world. At times people are his children who get distracted with these things of the world, but who are obsessing or focusing on these things. I just picture him seeing somebody playing a virtual reality game and not like snap out of it. I kind of picture that image. And
To me, it comes down to, like, say, knowledge is useless, and over the decades, people keep striving after the knowledge and finding out how things work, and they drill it down to even a smaller level. Oh, now this is how we know this works. This works because of that, but they forget to big picture why.
right. Well, I always love it, like kind of the earlier what we talked about, nothing is new. Like, well, what about great discoveries like space, gravity? Well, we discovered it, but it was there, Well, I look at the sun. I mean, you're like the sun. You just sit there, someone who just studies the sun, and just like you said, drills down to it, and you just get so minute in these details that are fascinating, interesting, and if anything, examples to God's amazing power. As the more you look into it, the detail you see, it's beyond comprehension. So it's a great point.
So many of them will go into those kinds of details and see all of the design and the intelligence built into the world, and they come to a conclusion still that there's no God. And in that regard, that level of
I
knowledge
think,
is very meaningful.
imagine dedicating your entire life to something, and you get to the very end, and you're faced with that moment of realizing, maybe for a split second, oh man, maybe there is, no. I mean, you go all that way, you put all that work, and you're going to throw it away. If you come to that admission, you just threw that all away. Can you do, so I think that's the problem with some of the scientific community today. So go ahead, Jackie.
When you start talking about this immediately, like Jesus saying, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? Like, popped in my head, because that's what it is. Like, it doesn't matter how much wisdom you have. We all need the nature.
Yeah, totally. What profit? What is it? What does it profit to gain the whole world and lose your soul? Definitely, Jackie. Last couple slides here. Oh, sorry,
That's
Ginny. I'm
what
sorry.
he was bragging about, what he had been through, his worldly knowledge and wisdom, right?
Totally.
Not just saying any.
No, I want to make that clear. Yeah, Psalm is not anti-wisdom, anti-knowledge. It is knowledge and wisdom apart from God. It is maybe you had a life, you have a relationship and a life with God, and you're one of his followers, but you become so distracted and obsessed and drilled down, and you completely forget, plug it in, whatever it may be, knowledge, wisdom, whatever. No, good point. That's the thing to make clear in this book. Okay, so then here in verse 18, he finishes it up. Because in much wisdom, there's much grief, and increasing in knowledge results in increasing pain. And that's kind of your comment, Autumn, when you said that kind of the more you know, the more you want to know, the more questions you have, the more you, like you said, Justin, you kind of get down to the end of it, and it sort of becomes empty, and you realize there's really grief in this and pain. So, to sum those 4 points up, all lifestyles are meaningless, nothing will change, knowledge is useless, desire for knowledge brings pain. Like you said, Janine, all under the precipice of apart from God. All of these things that humans can dress themselves with, blind themselves with, and obsess over, has a pretty bleak and vain ending, and that's Solomon's point here. Kind of the main lesson, and this, of course, this is week 1, and I'm excited to get into this study with everyone. I appreciate everybody's comments. That's kind of the neat thing about this book is there's different, different perspectives, and I encourage people to share them, and we'll try to move the class along as best we can. But kind of the main takeaway from tonight is you start to see that true purpose, true meaning cannot be found and will not be found under the sun. Okay? You have to go above the sun. You have to go, it's not going to be found in the realm of the visible, of the tangible, something that we can touch. You have to go to the realm of the invisible. And as we go on in these next couple weeks, we'll look at different things that Solomon does to reiterate some of these points. And then he's going to start sharing some of his conclusions and kind of see where he lands on some of this stuff. So it's week 1. I appreciate everybody's comments. So thank you. Everybody have a good week.